Hey, good morning, ladies. How are you this morning?
Good morning. Good morning, Cal. Good morning, Erica. Good morning, everyone.
So I want to start by just introducing us for those of you who are not familiar with us. We are Readiness Group. We are a training and resiliency company, and we work a lot with high-stress professionals. So what that means is a lot of first responders, military, teachers, those individuals who are kind of on the front lines and experiencing stress and trauma at a much higher rate than maybe other people are. So I am Dr. Kelly Guidry, and I am a counselor educator, and I will let the other two wonderful women introduce themselves.
I'm Dr. Brenda Tillman. I'm a EMDR solution-focused therapist who specializes in trauma and post-traumatic stress.
And I'm Dr. Erica Slee. I'm a physical therapist who focuses on mental health and how trauma stores in the body and how you can use physical strategies to kind of help process through trauma and manage chronic stress.
Whew, that's a mouthful.
Yeah.
So today we wanted to come on. Last week we talked a lot about that chronic stress, and in previous ones we've been talking about critical stress, and we wanted to kind of talk about what happens when the stress is too much and you have maybe past critical stress or your chronic stress is so high that maybe it's time to seek out some kind of additional professional help through counseling or some other type of professional entity. So we are counselors, though, so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about and pushing. So I'm going to let Erica kind of take it over from here.
Yep, I'm going to guide the discussion because I am not a mental therapist in the room. So I'm going to ask questions of the two counselors just to kind of give a framework around how to access therapy services, when to access therapy services, what are some new services that are out there and available that might be helpful to you so that you can kind of put a framework around what would be beneficial to you in your life. So I'll start with the first question, which I think is a lot, the people we work with are used to managing their own stuff. They're problem solvers, right? And so they will let a lot of things stack up on their plate before they'll reach out to a mental health professional for assistance. So I think the first question is, at what point do you know, and it's open to either of you to answer, at what point should you pull the trigger on requesting assistance from a therapist?
So I'll jump in, and then Brenda, you add. But I tend to do a lot of referrals for these guys and gals. One of the biggest things I hear is, "Oh, my significant other says I'm so different now." So I think that's a big sign. If you're looking into your relationships and you're seeing that your relationships are starting to suffer, and that doesn't have to be your significant other, it's also maybe with your kids, with your parents, with your friends. All of a sudden, maybe you're withdrawing a little bit from those conversations with them, or you find that you're more irritable, angry, kind of upset. I think that's a really big key indicator that maybe it's time to seek some additional support. I think another thing that is really huge is if you're starting to find that you're trying to cope that are in ways that are maybe unhealthy. Maybe you're drinking more, maybe you're not sleeping as much, maybe you are turning to just any number of things that might put a Band-Aid on the problem, so it makes you feel better in the moment, but it's not necessarily a long-term solution. So Brenda, what would you add to that?
Yeah, absolutely, Kellen. What you're talking about a lot, and we hear this a lot, is compassion fatigue. It's literally, I just don't have anything left to give either to my family or to my whatever it is. I do the job, I go to work, I do all the things I need to do, and then when I get home, I don't have anything to give. I just feel like that's where I just let go of everything. I don't have compassion for kids. I don't have compassion for families. And I think the important thing to recognize is the fact that that's pretty common, because at our jobs, we have to perform, and no matter what happens, we have to do the job. We have to provide that customer service. We have to give that compassion. And then all of a sudden we get home and there's an algebra problem, or there's a whatever, just those home things that just become that straw, right? That says, I got nothing for this. And so I think that's a very good awareness of when is it time to reach out? What should we be looking for? And so I also want to go to the fact that we have to remember that when we work in very high stress, high threat environments, and all of us do, because we hear secondarily a lot of things. The other individuals, first responders, and this goes to FAA. This goes to, I mean, all kinds of jobs. We look at this and we get this professional level of wall. This professional level of, I'm going to put this up. And man, it's going to be hard for me to put it back down and be able to re-engage. And we've talked about that, I think, in some of our sessions. But it's really hard to re-engage, so I just leave that wall up. And then what we begin to see is relationship suffering. And somebody once said that if the one thing that you should focus on is good at home, and if you're good at home, there's a really good chance you'll be good at work too. But the opposite is
from Dallas Fire.
Yes, the Dallas Fire. Ben always says in anything he teaches, if you're good at home, you'll probably be good at work. But if you're good at work, it doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be good at home. So a lot of times that focus on that at home to say, if I got the compassion I need, I'm going to build it for going to work, but I need to recognize it at home. So the end game to that, Kel, is, that wall needs to be able to go up when we're in the moment, and we need that suck it up phase, and it needs to be able to come back down. We need that cortical facilitation. We need to be able to re-engage the parasympathetic system to be able to say, okay, we're back in human mode, right? And a lot of times when that wall comes up and we're so protective of it, we're not able to put that, to re-engage that and become human again.
Yeah, we often get, kind of like Kel said, we get people accessing therapy because their spouse told them, kind of drew a line in the sand. For instance, Ben Westcott, one of the guys who teaches with us quite a bit, he tells the story in all of our classes about his wife coming up to him and putting her hand on his chest behind a couch one day in their house and saying, this is enough. You're ruining our family. This anger is getting to be too much and you need to do something about it. And that's often, we had another guy who came in and said, my wife thinks I'm an asshole. Can you fix that? That's often what happens, but it really is, because we can put the front on at work. We can fake it at work, and we have to, right, to do the jobs that we do. But when you start to see those relationships being impacted at a level, then it might be time to reach out.
And Erica, let me just say one more thing. For those who don't have that family at home, for younger first responders, for younger individuals who don't have that family at home and sometimes it's even more, sometimes it's more challenging because we don't have somebody to come up and say, this is beginning to happen, So you recognize those things that Kelly talked about, the isolation, the pulling away from people, the concept of, I don't want to be around anybody. I don't want to be around my fellow firefighters, my fellow police officers, dispatchers. I don't want to be around people. I'm starting to just isolate from that. I'm not enjoying the things I used to do. And I will tell you, and I really want to highlight this, COVID has changed everything. Isolation has become the norm, and almost guilt and fear associated with isolation now is driving a lot of what people are doing. So you really have to be cautious of those things and recognize them and know when it's time to reach out.
Yeah. So now let's say you get to a point, and sometimes it happens where you've just got high chronic stress, and then there's a straw, something a little bit more critical that happens, or a lot more critical, that gets you to a point where you make the decision, okay, I want to do something about this. And you make that decision to reach out. How do you find a therapist that works for you? Kelly, you want to start that one?
Yeah, that's a great question, Erica. So right now, actually, it's not easy to find a therapist because there's a lot of demand for mental health needs. But some things that I would be looking for. So there's different websites that you can go to start kind of filtering through and finding who you're looking for. So there's Psychology Today, or depending on what type of therapy, there's sometimes registries they're certified in a certain type of therapy. But just because they're certified, or just because they are listed on some website and somebody has raved about how good they are, doesn't mean that they're right for you. I like the metaphor of a good therapist is kind of like a good shoe. It's got to fit right. It's got to feel comfortable. You've got to be able to kind of walk in it and do things in it. And I think that that's really important. So don't just settle, as you're kind of seeking out and looking. Have certain questions that you ask. And, one would be, are you familiar with the culture of my profession? That's huge, especially in the first responder world or in professions where individuals are kind of seeing trauma or the demands of their job kind of put that real high stress level on them. You don't want to spend a significant amount of time explaining to your therapist what it's like to be in that world. That's just not a good part of therapy. So you want to be able to kind of dive in and jump in and build a really strong rapport and relationship with a therapist, which means they need to really have some of that ground knowledge of what your world looks like already. What would you add to that, Brenda?
Well, I would add to the fact that, it's not easy for individuals to reach out when they're at that point that they feel they need to reach out. That's the challenge, right? And so what we've got to do is as an individual who is experiencing that and looking for something, you've got to reach out to somebody else to kind of walk through that with you and somebody else to help you through that process. And then in turn, that means when you go to the resources that Kel just talked about, you've got to be willing to hold people accountable. So you have to call those therapists and say, do you guys work with first responders? Do you guys understand our culture or any really high threat, high stress? I think about, the people who work in the oil field right now and people who work in accident investigation. And I mean, we could name... I'm military. We could name so
really
many.
Anybody, right?
Yeah,
high threat, high stress. Someone who resonates with you, right?
Right. You've got to find those people who get you, right? And so it's a matter of asking them. If they don't call you back when you call for a therapist, that's a really good sign that they're probably not going to be that individual who's going to worry about. That's not true. That means they're either way busy. Or maybe you need to try someone else.
Which might be the case right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Because things are really, very, very crazy right now with mental health and scheduling. And so it is holding people accountable to say, I want to ask you a question. Do you work with this base? And tell me what type of therapy you do. We're going to talk about EMDR. It's a great trauma-based somatic therapy, CBT. All of these kinds of things are therapy practices that work really well with trauma. Yeah. And so we kind of have to inform ourselves. And that is not an easy thing to do when you're already in distress.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's important to mention that for a lot of people, they'll have different resources. Obviously, you have your insurance, and you can find an in-network provider through your insurance is sometimes a good way to go. And then once you get that list, then you can kind of go online and look for reviews on those people is a good way to do it. You can also, a lot of organizations, if you work, have an employee assistance program. Sometimes they're great, sometimes they're not, but it might be a good place to start. Often you can get a few free sessions, and then sometimes you can even change the topic and get more free sessions. So that's a good option. There's private pay. There's a lot of organizations out there that you can just schedule and go private pay for counseling services. And then there's some nonprofits for different agency-related issues. So like 22 Kill works with first responders and veterans, and they offer, I think it's 6 free sessions in the DFW area. So there's a lot of resources out there for that kind of stuff as well. But we kind of started alluding to the different types of therapy. Can you guys go through maybe a list of 3 to 5 that are good to look into depending on what you're looking for?
Yeah, go ahead, Kel.
Yeah, I'll kind of jump in and then I'll let Brenda take it over when we get to the EMDR part of it. But I feel like when you're kind of looking, so there's, depending on what it is that you're wanting to kind of tackle. So you want somebody who's going to be willing to kind of meet you where you're at. So a lot of therapists are generally trained. And they can do a bunch of types of therapy, but there's some certification therapies that I think could be really beneficial or helpful. But let's start with the ones that are not certification. So cognitive behavioral therapy is going to be one that I think it's a deep dive. So it's not for everybody because it does take a lot of effort and a lot of work when you get in there, but it's called CBT is the shortened version of that. There is a trauma-focused CBT. It tends to be more used with kiddos, so 3 to 17, but some counselors, there's some evidence that kind of supports it for adults as well. So that would be one to look for a CBT. The other one that Brenda mentioned earlier is solution-focused brief therapy, and any therapist can integrate a trauma component into a solution-focused brief therapy work, just like she kind of combines solution-focused brief therapy with EMDR. So you can definitely find somebody who's willing to integrate that. I tend to work more with families and kids, so I can't have this conversation and not mention some of those that do work well with kids. So TFCBT is one of those. The other one that I am trained in, and if it's done right, can be done with trauma as well as parent-child interaction therapy. That's a really strong one, actually, because it's dyadic. So if one of those relationships that's suffering is the relationship between your child and yourself, it's a great modality for rebuilding those connections with your kiddos. And I think that attachment is so important. So and then last but not least, I think EMDR, unless you have others you want to mention, Brenda, we could go on for days about the different modalities. But.
Yeah, there's so many of them, especially if that is exactly whom you're working with, individuals who experience trauma. And remember that we're talking about individual incidents that happened yesterday, and then we're talking about other things that we have packed away and just made, just really given a comfortable place down here until it's not comfortable anymore because there's too much of it. And that's kind of the process of what we're talking about now in terms of what do you do when life becomes not okay, when all of a sudden you don't really know why things happen, why things seem overwhelming now. Why now? Because there was no huge thing that happened, or maybe there was. Maybe it was the loss of a parent or an animal, or it just depends on what your Achilles heel is as to what the straw is going to be, right? So EMDR is an amazing bilateral stimulation process that speeds up the brain's ability to address what you've experienced, whether it's past trauma from years ago or whether it's trauma from yesterday or today, right? I mean, we can actually process individual incidents. And we're actually now peers, paraprofessionals are able to go and get trained in a variant of EMDR that they can actually just work the event that is happening right now today at the scene or right afterwards at the station or whatever it might be. So, we know that trauma stores when we sleep. We know that trauma can be exacerbated if it's not worked off that plate. You will hear people say, it's always on, I can't shut it off. And of course, that's leading down the road to post-traumatic stress disorder as it's defined in the DSM. But EMDR literally gives your brain the opportunity to say, okay, how can I go back through this event and keep both sides of keep the whole brain active so I can think about this and get a full neural thought of it, and then actually organize it in a way that will open up that hippocampus and be able to put it away. Now, we're humans, and so hopefully we're still going to have emotion attached to sad things, right? People say, why does that still make me cry when I've processed it? Well, when you bring it up, it's still going to be a bad memory. Hopefully the emotional connection to the memory is not as strong, and you'll be able to bring it up and maybe feel emotion attached to it, maybe not, and then be able to put it away as well. But it's not always on. So EMDR gives the opportunity for the brain to not protect. When we talk about that wall coming up, that wall means I'm stuffing this stuff down here and I'm not going to let anybody see that stuff. And so that's when that wall comes up. And of course, these are just analogies. What we're attempting to do is take that wall down and let the full brain address what's going on without going into that fight or flight feeling of, oh no, I don't want to go back to this, but to go back and re-experience it and be able to then get that full walkthrough of the event and that full neural thought to be able to organize it and put it away. It's not easy. When people say, I'm going to go do therapy, I don't think people realize how challenging it is to go back and address things that we've stuffed away for a very long time, or even things that happened yesterday that we just want to shake our head and walk the other way from, right? That is not easy to go back. And I'll tell you, the longer it's stored down here, the more difficult it is to go back to. And so the nice thing about EMDR is you don't sit down across from somebody and talk the event through. You just experience through either eye movement, which is supposedly what research-wise is what works best for processing trauma, and or bilateral stimulation or auditory stimulation as well, where it just activates both sides. But I want to tell you the nice thing about EMDR is even things that we don't realize that maybe the subconscious picked up and is just kind of out there causing challenges. EMDR kind of rolls through that stuff, and once we break that stopper through that is stopping everything up from downloading into the hippocampus, all of a sudden things begin to download. And so it gives us that opportunity, even without having to walk through each event, to be able to download things. And then maybe we'll have another stopper, another really bad event that we just didn't get past or whatever it is. The other nice thing about EMDR is it doesn't have to be event specific. If my anxiety is creeping up, if I just feel very overwhelmed by life, you can go back and address those things through EMDR without having to identify specifically what they are, right? And then all of a sudden what you begin to see is that you're not experiencing the emotion connected as much to that whatever it is, whether it's reunions or whether it's family or whether it's whatever. It is one of those processes that we are learning more and more as therapists about every day, but it's been here since the 80s. So it's not like it's new. There's a lot of well-rounded evidence-based practice research now that we can go back to and say, is this something we need to be using? You guys, for trauma, as a trauma therapist, I don't know what I did before we got that opportunity to use EMDR. So, and I say that because when you're not guiding, when you're trying to guide back to what's causing what's going on, the challenge is that the brain is very protective, and man, you've developed really good skills to do that. And so going back into those things where the brain says, oh no, I'm still protecting myself is hard to do. Mm-hmm. So this is a process that allows you to not say, okay, here's what we're talking about. It just kind of goes in there and works through, works through those things and kind of figures it out. And all those things we really want to tightly protect often are automatically brought up without us having to work that hard to do it. But the work is hard because the emotion attached to that, because we've stored it so long, or because it is emotional, is what we have to work through.
I love that. And I know we've got to wrap it up pretty soon, but I do just want to add a couple things that have come up in classes. Most first responders who've been through this will say it's voodoo. I have no idea how it works, but it works. We get a lot of really good referrals from first responders who typically do not want to talk about their stuff and don't want to go to a therapy setting. And we had a resiliency summit in Grand Prairie PD, and they had a Blackwater sniper, a 9/11 firefighter, an Oklahoma City bombing firefighter, all three of which had been suicidal at some point and said EMDR saved their lives. They have no idea how, but they know that it worked, right? Yeah. So it can be pretty profound, and it's, you don't have to talk a lot when you go through EMDR. It's a lot. The therapy setting is that you think about a memory and you start the bilateral stimulation process, and you kind of just go through the memory itself, not talking about it. And then after a minute, you talk about, okay, what came up. So that is a really effective strategy that you can use. And if you want to learn more about it, EMDRIA.org is a great website that you can visit to learn more.
Erica, I just also want to say that there are a lot of athletes, a lot of coaching practices, a lot of people are looking at this now and how do I break that ceiling if I can't seem to get past where I am? Because for a lot of people, that's mental, right? I have a mental block that I can go above and beyond what I'm doing now. I'm maxed out. Yeah. And so this is really a strength-based practice that helps people just kind of clear things. And then we go into the somatic area of how is it storing in the body? And of course, Bessel van der Kolk's book is incredible, The Body Keeps the Score, to say, it's not just the brain, it's the body. And EMDR addresses that too. Let's focus on where you feel that, where you experience that in your body. And so it is a really good practice. Can people not experience positive impact from this? Yes. You've heard of some people who literally have blocked well enough or that it just doesn't work for. And so it's not the end all be all. All the things Kel mentioned are also really good therapeutic methods for addressing trauma. But EMDR is also one that should be considered.
And I think it's also important to note that trauma is specific to you. So it's not necessarily trauma, a big event that you would recognize in a vocabulary book about what trauma is. It really is what's personal to you. And so it doesn't have to be trauma related. It can be symptom related, anxiety, depression, that kind of thing as well.
Yes.
So.
Yes.
All right. We are going to have to wrap it up. I'm sorry I'm rushing, but we have a 9:30 group that we've got to get on and start a Zoom meeting for. So just to sum up, Kel, do you want to kind of sum up the areas that we talked about and how people can look up more for themselves, the takeaways?
Yeah, so I think the big takeaways are kind of knowing when it's time to reach out. So we kind of walked through some of those things to be looking for on an individual or in your relationship. So kind of looking for that. Where do I look for a therapist? So there's all kinds of resources out there. I did drop in the chat the website to the EMDR website. They have what is EMDR, but they also have Find a Therapist. So anybody that's registered on there is an EMDR certified therapist. So you can go and find somebody in your area. There's also things like Psychology Today. We also are happy to help with referrals. If there's ever anybody watching this and says, hey, I need someone, send us a message and we're happy to kind of help and jump in there. And then finally, what is EMDR? What are different types of therapies that help? And then ending kind of with EMDR. So just kind of those takeaways of these are the good things that you need to be looking for if in fact you're ready to reach out and pursue something that from more of a professional support perspective.
Awesome. Brenda, anything you can add?
No, what were you going to say, Kel?
Oh, I was going to say I wanted to wrap up and say we're going to take a week or two break because you two beautiful ladies are going on an amazing self-care vacation. And so I'm excited for you guys to get away and get some rest. But we will be back towards the middle of June with our next Facebook Live.
Beautiful. No, Erica, I just recommend to people, don't carry it if you don't, because you don't have to, right? Don't carry it. Reach out and do the things that make you well. Yeah. You're the one who knows that.
I love that. That's a great way to end it because it's your choice if you want to live with it or not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Ladies,
right.
thank you for that. That was awesome.
All right.